Hello everyone, my name is Ives Van Hoorne. It is quite hard to pronounce, even in the Netherlands, so I'm used to all different pronunciations. You can call me Ives, Ives. For some reason my friends have more trouble with my name, so they call me Flip. If you want to call me Flip, that's fine as well. You may know me from Code Sandbox. I started that project about 2 years ago. It's an online web application editor. Sounds a bit weird, but you can build a React application, for example, on the website and then share it with others by sharing the URL and they can fork. And normally I give talks about Code Sandbox, but today I'm not going to give a talk about Code Sandbox. I'm going to give a talk about something that I am very passionate about. And I've been thinking about it a lot for the past 2 months. And it's design and code, or specifically design and code tooling. Because I noticed from my workflow, when I build an application, I do a first mock-up in a design tool like Sketch or Figma. Then I start implementing the code when I'm happy with the result. And it seems that I'm not the only one doing it this way, because I tweeted about it. What is your workflow for creating a new element/page? And lots of responses were like this. In general, I like to sketch the idea out, Sketch or Figma, and then iterate until the code is done and start working on the code. And I always noticed that there were two kind of problems with this. Well, not problems, but difficulties with this approach. Because design tooling doesn't know anything about the code tooling or the implementation. So I always find two problems. Design and code are in isolation, and design and code have duplication. So let me quickly elaborate, because this sounds so vague. So let's say a designer or someone else built this beautiful design. It has like a nice name, a nice follower count. It has rounded corners. I'm not sure if you can see it there, but it should have rounded corners, and it has a nice shadow. But then the implementation, the developer starts implementing it, and it turns out like this. The names are too long, there are maybe some characters that don't work, the buttons are sometimes too big, and the reality is that the design was fit perfectly for the data, but not for the real data. So the designer has to go back to the drawing board, or you have to go back to the drawing board, and you have to re-implement the design. Then the developer, or you again, have to re-implement it in the implementation, and it goes back and forth until you reach an equilibrium where it's stable, so to say. Design and implementation are okay. That also comes to the second problem. If you have a design and you have an implementation, you have to keep them in sync manually. So when for example, a color of a button changes in the design, then the implementation has to update it. So I find this super interesting, and I think this can be possibly solved by merging design, by blending design and implementation with the tooling. And I want to talk a bit about this here. I will first start about what is done, the past. Then I will talk about what's currently being done. And this is pretty interesting because some cool new tools have been released recently, and I want to show a demo. And I will speculate about the future of what we can do in the far future when we have AI and Alexa doing our designs. So let's go back to 21 years ago, 96, 17th of December, 3 days before I was released, CSS was released. And this was really cool because this was the first official spec of CSS. So people could put their design, put their creativity juices on the website and just share the website with others. And it was very nice because people could easily share it with others. But it was still a very technological endeavor. It was pretty, I think not many people knew how to do it. But then the Genius tool was released. I think many of you have heard of this one. Do you know this logo? How many of you know this? Dreamweaver. It was so ahead of its time. Only a year after CSS has officially been published, Dreamweaver was released. And it looks like this. Whew. You have a nice preview, you have code. When you make changes in the preview, the code updates. When you make changes in the code, the preview can update. It was really cool because people that didn't have any understanding of how websites are built could still start building creative websites. And they could deploy it right from within Dreamweaver. So as websites became more popular, Dreamweaver became more popular as well, and it's a really cool tool. But at some point, it started to become it started to become server-generated websites. So at first we had static HTML files, some CSS files we put on the FTP server and shared the URL with others. But then we moved to server-generated websites more and more. Businesses started to see the value of websites, and they wanted to have dynamic content on the website, so they started using PHP, and they started to use Rails, for example. And Dreamweaver didn't have super good support for that, so the popularity of Dreamweaver started to decline a bit. And it had some upsides over time, but it generally declined. Which brings me to these tools. These tools became more and more popular. This was already a popular way of building websites, but this became more popular than before. You have a clear separation here of design and code. This is Sketch, and people also use Photoshop, Illustrator, and you have Coda, or now Visual Studio Code, and you just built a design in this design tool, and then you did the re-implementation in the code editor. It was pretty interesting, because the design tool allowed you to very quickly prototype like we do now, and then you could just, when you think you're ready, you move it to the code editor. But when we go to the present, you can see a new movement, which is very familiar. We start separating server from client again. When people start projects, or when companies are also moving to it, they have an API server. The server gives data using an API, and you have a standalone client, which is interesting because this is pretty similar to how it was. And another cool thing is that technologies are starting to merge a bit. We now have like 3 big popular frameworks. We have Angular, we have React, and we have Vue. And when you look at them very closely, they seem very different, especially Angular and React. But when you have like a bigger, if you take a step back, then you see that these are all component-based frameworks. You write components, you write logic in them, and then you compose your application of different components. And what's more interesting is that design tools have been doing this for a long time. They use components as well. What could this mean for us? Well, recently a very interesting tool was released. It's called Framer-X. How many of you have heard of Framer-X? Cool. Wow, they have a good marketing team. Framer-X, actually this presentation is in Framer-X. It's some kind of inception. But Framer-X allows you to use your React components right into design. And this is super interesting because you can put your source of truth of your design in the React components. So let's say if you need to update the button color, you only change your React component and its designs will automatically update and the production code will automatically update. And you can do much more interesting stuff. For example, these dynamic design components things. For example, this is a React component, this here. It shows the time that it's now 3:05, so I have some time for my talk. And you can play with them. Bloop. You can change this. This is all, because they are a React component, they can be pretty dynamic. And this is another example. We have a map. And based on our current location, we can see the map. Okay, I want to show you a quick demo because I like this so much. So this is Framer. Bloop. And you can create canvases. And then you have a new button here called create component, and you can say hello, for example. You can create it from code, and it will open your code editor. And this is just a React component. So if I move this component inside the design here, you can see hello world. And I can change, for example, this props to text to I like cookies. And it will update this live. You can also do dynamic values like date dot now dot toString and this, and it will show date dot yeah, new date dot toString. That's more beautiful. So this is pretty interesting. I think this allows you. So I can have another example. I was working on a loading screen for Code Sandbox. And for Code Sandbox, maybe I can show you quickly. For Code Sandbox, we have a fancy boxes on the homepage, like phew, phew, phew. Cool, right? These are just React components. These are 6 divs with huge box shadows. That's why we had to lower them on Safari to make the glow effect. I took these boxes and I made them in Framer. I just copied the code and put them in Framer, and now I can play with them. I can make them bigger. I can change the props of them. I can, for example, animate them. I can change the offset of it. Maybe I can change the color to be very bright. Ooh, I can duplicate them. Oh boy. You can get so creative with this. And I never would have built this box thing if I weren't able to move the components as I wanted to. So this is super interesting. So Framer X is a good example of blending design and code. And I think this is a great groundwork on we can do much more with this concept. And I want to show you 2 ideas of what the future may hold. I think that if the right people with the right minds of like code editors, design tools, come together at the right time and start working on integrating these tools well, we can have a very new way of, a new way of creating websites. It's just a matter of time. The first thing that we can do is move the responsibility of layout to the design tool. I'm super opinionated on this. When you have a designer creates a design for 3 breakpoints. They are using absolute positioning. Then they give these images to the developer, and the developer has to re-implement the layout in code. It's not very intuitive. You have to work in code. You have a Webpack dev server, which takes 20 seconds to hot module reload on every change, so the iteration is not that fast. And it's generally pretty hard. It's a skill to move to the layout. And let's say that you try a new breakpoint as developer and it doesn't work in the design. Then the designer has to go back to the drawing board and to try to re-implement recreate a design. So I would find it interesting if we could put the responsibility of layout in the design tools, so that you start, when you build a design, you start thinking of the layout from the start. And this may sound a bit slow. This may sound like it will slow the prototyping phase, but I want to show you something. If it's done right, intuitively, I created this example. And Framer has this concept of stacks. So if I create a new thing, a stack is actually just flexbox. This is a flexbox. If I have, for example, this nice yellow, this is my yellow today, and I duplicate it and make it purple. If you put them inside your flexbox, they will behave like you put them in the flexbox. So now you can change the properties of this flexbox. It's just an intuitive UI where you can say, oh, I want this direction, I want this direction. I want them, for example, at the start. I want them at the center. Maybe I should increase the gap. You can, whoop, whoop, whoop. Cool, right? And I created a very simple mock-up of a website. So let's say a designer built this. This is built with only stacks, this small Code Sandbox website. If you want to check how it is to have the sidebar on the side, on the left side, you can do bloop, and it's on the other side. Or if you want to check if the icons, how they behave, you can just swap the icons as you want to. Or if you want to see how it works on different sizes, you can, you can just resize and see how everything behaves. And notice that the sidebar doesn't change its width. That's a fixed width, and we made the content flex 1. So I find this pretty interesting. Even more interesting would be, in Framer you can already use existing React components. If you let designers only use the React components in their design, you could maybe export these kind of layout to a React component that the developer then can use. Maybe it's not a perfect export. Maybe some tweaks needs to be made by the developer, but the developer doesn't have to re-implement the whole flow from the start, the whole layout from the start again. This is one of an interesting development that I'd like to see. The second one is, oh, look at this. The second one is put real data in the design tool. I showed the example of the names first, where it was designed for like very short names, and it turns out that the customers in the database had long names. You could maybe connect your design tool to like your GraphQL API, or you could connect your design tool to your product's REST API, and that you can dynamically use the data that's already on the database for your designs. Then you're already working with real-life scenarios for real-life use cases. And then you know exactly what the design will look like when you push it to production. Very small example of this is a grid component in Framer. It's connected to a people component. I can maybe show you, it's maybe easier. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Yeah, here. This is a grid component. You can connect it to other components and it will render it. And this grid component thing is using data from a real API. So for example, I can also increase the rows with this. I really like playing with this, and now you have, now it doesn't fit anymore. But you use real data for your designs. So I want to conclude that I think that we can move forward with blending design and prototyping. I'm really curious what others think here. I have been talking with some people, but I have never given a talk about this opinion. And I'm really curious if other people have opinions. So if you have any questions about, or no, if you want to discuss this, or have any questions on why CodeSandbox is not working, then you can talk to me afterwards. Oh, and if for the people that know CodeSandbox, if you want CodeSandbox stickers, I have lots of CodeSandbox stickers with me. Thank you very much.